Good evening, and welcome to the 815th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm Dambisa Moyo. I'm vice chair of the club, global economist and co-principal of a family office, Versica Investments. It is a pleasure to be here with you all. Recognized as the premier non-partisan forum in the nation, the Economic Club of New York stands as the leading platform for discussion on economic, social, and political matters. For more than 100 years, the club has hosted over 1,000 preeminent guest speakers, contributing to our tradition of excellence. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the students joining us virtually from Rutgers and Mercy University. I also want to welcome the attending members of our 2025 class of fellows, a select group of diverse, rising next-generation business thought leaders. Please note that applications for the 2026 Fellows class will be available on our website beginning October 1. It is my honor today to welcome our guest, Wael Sawan. Wael was appointed CEO of Shell plc in 2023. He was previously Director of Integrated Gas, Renewables, and Energy Solutions. He has been a member of the Executive Committee since 2019 when he was appointed Upstream Director. Wael joined Shell in 1997 and has worked in each of Shell's core business units, upstream, integrated gas, and downstream. In his time with Shell, he has served in roles including Vice President of Commercial New Business and LNG in Qatar, Managing Director and Chairman of the Qatar Shell Companies, and Executive Vice President of Shell's Deepwater business. He was born in Lebanon and grew up in the United Arab Emirates and Canada. He holds a master's degree in chemical engineering from McGill University in Montreal and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Today's format will be a fireside chat in which we are delighted to have Dan Yergin, Vice Chair of the S&P Global, doing the honors of moderating. As a reminder, this conversation is on the record, as we do have media online and in the room. Time permitting, they may take member questions from those in the room. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Wael and Dan Yergin to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, Dambisa. And again, Wael, let me add my welcome to the New York Economic Club. I thought we'd start, Dambisa said that this club is over 100 years old, so Shell. And during that time, there's been quite a lot of changes in the world economy. In the 30 years you've been with Shell, there's been a lot of changes. And in the last year or so, there have been a lot of changes. So I think we just start with a big picture. How does it look to you, world of tariffs? Supply chains until 2019 were things that mainly people who manage supply chains talked about. Now everybody talks about them. How do things look to you?
Yeah, before I start, Dan, great to be here with you again. Dambisa, thank you very much for the introduction. It's an honor to be here this evening. And if I look back, I think change is a constant and has been a constant in our industry. For those of you who haven't read Dan's books, those are books you must read. And I think one of the key themes that you talk about, Dan, through history, energy has managed to find itself at the intersection of these massive forces that shape the world as we know it today. And I think you're seeing that continuing, whether it is the discussions around climate change, whether it is the mega trends related to AI, whether it is the geopolitical fragmentation we are seeing. Energy, once again, is at that nexus. Of course, what's happened in Russia, Ukraine, has also meant that energy security has risen up the agenda of many governments that at least we are engaging with on a regular basis. Now, through all of that, a company like ours that, as you say, has been around for over 100 years.
And I should add, operates in 70 countries.
And operates in 70 countries. We have to be able to adapt to those realities as they evolve, recognizing that while it might feel like it's unique times and, as I keep hearing, unprecedented context, of course, that is what history has shown us time and time again. is what we have to navigate. A company like ours, I think, is well positioned to be able to navigate that space, partly because of the diversified nature of the portfolio, partly because we are very much focused on what the big picture is around energy. And what we see at the moment is between now...
I'm not going
Okay.
to get to energy quite yet.
Sure.
We're still going to find out what it's like in a world of tariffs and supply chain problems, just how the world economy looks to you, and then we're going to get to what you do about it.
Look, I think the headwinds are clear. Put aside all the pronouncements and what people talk about. What we are seeing day to day at the moment is whether it's the inflationary pressure, whether it's the demand challenge that we are seeing in some parts of the world, like in China at the moment, those are going to have an impact overall on the broader economies. One of the big things we keep picking up is many of the countries that maybe typically had become very comfortable with the alliances that they had are rethinking those alliances. And that does mean a fundamental shift in the way that they think about their economies, energy being one, but more broadly. I just came from Canada, where, of course, within a Canadian context, there's a real deep thought process by the new government to think about how they are going to essentially stand on their own 2 feet when it comes to energy exports, to become an energy superpower, as they've said. Companies like ours, as we see all of that noise, are trying to make sure we can actually identify the signals from the noise. Right. The signals continue to sort of indicate that, yes, there is resilience in the global economy. Yes, we continue to see that, by and large, inflation, while up, is not yet derailing that economic activity. But we worry that there might be more to come as we see the full impacts of tariffs and the like.
What about supply chains? Is that an issue?
Supply chains right now, in our sector, less so.
Right.
In particular, when I think about many of the elements are, we're talking about multiple years that you can actually feel the impact of the supply chain. For a company like Shell, we are experiencing something that is less than 1% of the overall supply chain that we have. We suspect in 2-3 years, if the current reality persists, that's going to grow significantly. But in the short term, we have fixes for it. There are particular sectors and segments where we see real challenge. Anything to do with transformers, electric transformers, is a real challenge. Right. Anything to do with gas turbines is a real challenge. But access to supply chains in general has been manageable.
Right. So in this kind of uncertainty that exists and the changes that have occurred over the last year, or really last few years, how do you go about thinking about, how do you structure your thinking?
We reflect on both long-term trends and then short-term actions. From a long-term trends perspective, what we see is that almost in all scenarios, energy demand is going to grow. And so we try to focus on those fundamentals, because otherwise you get caught in the short-term realities that might confuse you from the destination you want to get to. The long-term fundamentals, in our assessment, seem to indicate that, in essence, 1/3 of the world's population will move up into the middle class by 2050. That translates into somewhere in the range of around a 25% increase in primary energy demand between now and 2050. That energy demand has to be filled through multiple different channels.
Do you think that's well recognized?
That is a tough question. I think those who are in the know understand it. I think, unfortunately, for sometimes political expediency, it doesn't seem to be registering and translating into policies that could encourage the supply that allows us to meet that demand. A lot of the debate gets polarized between conventional energy and alternative low-carbon energy, rather than, I think, so Jason here as well, Jason Bordoff, him and I, when we last spoke about this, he said it's energy addition. I strongly believe in that. The world is finding ways to be able to continue to add different forms of energy to be able to achieve that growth in demand. And remember, the one thing that I also recognize not everyone appreciates is conventional energy, like from oil. These are supplies that decline every single year to the tune of around 5%. So you need to keep running on that treadmill just to stay flat.
Yeah. Do you think people were shocked when the International Energy Agency the other day came out and said the world needs to invest $540 billion a year every year for the next 25 years in order to just keep supply where it is?
you and I, Dan, who have been in the industry for some time, I don't think there was anything new in that context. What was disappointing is it's taken us that long to announce that. Yeah. Were some people surprised? I'm sure some were. I think for folks who are involved in the day-to-day of the energy sector, those are the realities that our frontline troops are battling day in and day out to be able to maintain that energy that the world needs across the multiple countries in which we operate. And I think we sometimes belittle those efforts by sort of saying, oh, it's all okay, it's going to be fine, we do this, we do that. I think those efforts, including, for example, our people offshore here in the Gulf of America, the effort that they put in every single day to be able to sustain production is heroic, nothing short of that. And therefore, I'm glad that the IEA has acknowledged that reality.
Yes. So Shell's, as we said, is over 100 years, and cultures change over that time. And I think one of the priorities that you had was to deal with a culture change, to adapt to a changing world. And maybe you'd say a little bit about that and how you thought about it, because in a large company, that's a big challenge.
I think as a company, we have always took pride in our ability to think ahead. Many people might have heard about the Shell scenarios, where we look into the future and try to predict plausible outcomes of where the world might go so that we can inform our investment decisions in the short and medium term around those. The danger sometimes with that is you start to assume that there's almost a linear pathway towards that future rather than the reality of an uncertain world in which we live. And so what we have been trying to work on from a cultural evolution perspective is to get the organization to be clear, what is it that we should monitor but simply cannot control? Right? Geopolitics, the economic realities. We can pretend to sort of try to call exactly where the world's going, but the reality is we have no clue. And so what we can then do is make sure that we understand the signposts that tell us where the world's going and try to respond to them. There's a bucket there that we can also influence, our relationships with customers. Shell has one of the largest customer bases in the world. We deal with 1 million B2B customers every single day. And we deal with over 30 million retail customers in our mobility business, our retail stations. So we can influence and understand those customer needs and the evolution of those needs. Similarly, we can work with governments to help them. But the key focus we've tried to bring to the company over the last few years is to focus on what it is that we can control. What we can control is the nature of our portfolio, its resilience to the cycles that are inevitable in the energy sector. What we can control is the health of our balance sheet. What we can control is our ability to adopt emerging technology to become leaner, much more focused on what we do. So we've tried to bring a lot more of those levers of control, the clarity around what's required, get a lot more focus so that we balance the intellectual perspectives on the future with the important running the basics every single day. We call it the brilliant basics. It's just getting stuff done day in and day out, but being the best we can be at it, rather than appreciating and accepting mediocrity. We want to be the best at what we do.
And was that, how difficult? Tell us about just how you went about doing that.
We have been, I think we've had to sort of reset our role as a company. We got very, very clear that we were simply not being as competitive as we needed to be. So we tried to confront the reality that inconsistency in delivery was just not good enough. And that was important because, of course, if you have a mindset that all is going well, there is no need to change. Right? We tried to fundamentally change the importance of performance. We used the tagline, performance, discipline, simplification. And it wasn't just a tagline. We then moved into saying, okay, how are we going to drive performance? Firstly, you need to be able to have appropriate MI. So we put the systems in place, the data in place, so that frontline can have that data at their fingertips every single second. Right. We shifted performance cadences that were sometimes once a month to once a week, sometimes once a day, depending on where you were in the organization.
That's pretty intense.
It's intense, but at the same time, it meant that people moved from meetings and arm waving to actually, let's understand where we sit on the competitiveness scale. How are our benchmarks doing? We can do better. What are you doing about it by tomorrow? Not in 6 months' time, tomorrow. Right. And so we've tried to instill that hunger to win again rather than this hunger to participate.
Right.
And that's what we hope to continue to do. By the way, I don't want to leave you with any illusion that we are where we want to be. We've started the journey, we continue to make good progress, but we are a long way from where we want to be, which is truly the top performer in our sector.
Right. So I want to go back to some of the things you can't control for a couple of minutes, and then we'll turn to the energy sector and a lot of energy questions. And one thing you can't control is Europe. The problem of the competitiveness of Europe. What's it called? CS3D.
Yes.
All the regulatory. Just tell us, how hard is it to operate in Europe? And is Europe deindustrialized?
Let me start with the positive side of the story then.
So I should.
Let me start with the positive side of the story and then to some of the hard realities. I think Europe has the formula to be able to improve. Enrico Letta was tasked with writing a report to the Commission that talks about competitiveness. That was followed by a Mario Draghi report. For those who have had the opportunity to read both reports, they are excellent reports.
But Draghi just the other day said not much has happened.
And that is now you're moving into the space of the hard realities. While the blueprint for success is there, the inertia in the system is just huge. And what you are seeing indeed is some deindustrialization. It's really difficult to compete. I mean, think of it this way. If you are an industrial player today, chemicals or cement, one, you have a cost of carbon that you don't have in other areas like in Asia or in the US. So you're competing with that handicap. Then you have energy that is priced at anywhere between 3 to 4 times more expensive than some of those alternatives. The permitting requirements to be able to do any work is being challenged. You put all that together, it doesn't mean that suddenly things are going to stop overnight, but it doesn't help new investments as companies like ours and others are looking to make those investments. And that is worrying, right? Even in a place like the UK, where we are headquartered, of course, in the North Sea. Shell had a funnel of close to $10 billion of projects between now and end of the decade, which is now shelved.
You should explain to them why. You didn't shelve it.
So we shelved it on the back that the economics is no longer compelling because of what's known as the energy profits levy, which in essence is a tax that at the time was placed because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Against that, there was a view that these prices were too high and therefore companies like ours were having a windfall. Of course, prices are now at, if not below, some of the averages we have seen, and that tax continues to hold. Unfortunately, that means that those investments, those $10 billion of investments, which we would have liked to make in the UK, are no longer profitable for us to make. And so that $10 billion we keep, and we will look to invest in either other countries or deleverage or reward our shareholders. In a world where we desperately need more energy to be able to meet the 25% demand growth that we talked about, to meet the AI ambitions of a country like the UK and Europe, I think the ability to be able to reconcile those different elements we haven't been able to crack yet in Europe. It is tougher, of course, to do that. You've mentioned CS3D and others. Those are all just additional layers of uncompetitiveness that mean you have to work twice as hard to be able to get that dollar of return in Europe, which is a real shame for such an important ally to the US.
So when you try and, I'm sure you try and explain this to the European Commission, and what happens?
I think there's everyone out there that we talk to is very smart, they get it. It is, again, the complexity of the bureaucracy and commitments that had been made in the past and how people sort of then are uncomfortable maybe changing tack in the new context. Don't get me wrong, the Commission is trying to do things, but it just hasn't gone far enough to be able to create that environment that can compete with a US that's going all out to be able to really build out its energy infrastructure and beyond, with Asia, with the Middle East, all of whom are inviting companies like ours to say, come, bring your wares and invest in our country. And so the dynamic, the competitive dynamic in which Europe is playing has just increased, and they're going to have to figure out how they can play in that space.
So let's look a little bit to the east of Europe. I know that some of the members in advance sent the question, which everybody would like to hear you on, is Russia, sanctions, Russian gas, just what your thinking is about, as it is today, how that unfolds.
I think there was of course, invasion and the implications on the energy needs of Europe was a rude shock to the system. Credit to the Commission, actually, they navigated it, partly with the help of low Chinese demand, which helped in 2022 and 2023. Otherwise, you would have had a significant pull of gas resources to China that otherwise found their way into Europe. I think the second bit is deindustrialization helps, ironically, because you have less demand for that energy, in particular in those sectors. And there were other factors that also played in that meant Europe was advantaged. Weather was a simple one. Sometimes you have to depend on the gods to work in your favor. The winter of 2022 and the winter of 2023 were moderate, which meant you didn't have as much energy demand for heating and the like in Europe. Today, Europe is talking about its 19th package of sanctions, which could see Europe, in essence, wean itself off Russian energy, gas, and beyond.
So they would enshrine that in law, and then not easy to turn that around.
It would be tough to turn it around, but who knows where the world goes. But you're right, it wouldn't be easy to turn it around. Of course, the reality is a molecule that was coming from Russia into Europe if it doesn't come into Europe, it will go into another location, Asia or the like.
You're speaking about oil or gas?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. So what we see at the moment is Russia starting to look at different evacuation paths for its own molecules. In the case of gas, for example, there was an announcement just recently during the Putin-Xi meeting of potentially the second phase of a mega gas project, a mega gas pipeline that would take more gas from Russia into China, making Russia very dependent on Chinese demand for the future. And so companies like ours end up having to take what is the economically most rational option, which is Russian gas into Europe. Now we have to think about, okay, if Russian gas goes to China, where do we get gas into Europe? And of course, LNG coming out of the US is a prime candidate to be able to fill that, or Qatari LNG that also fills that. That space is evolving. I think at the end of the day, as long as Russian molecules aren't fully sanctioned globally, all you change is trade flows.
Right.
But the total supply hasn't materially changed. What has actually impacted things just in the last few weeks is the drone attacks on Russian infrastructure. We see that is having...
You've seen that effect in the market.
That is starting to affect the market because you're talking about 1 million barrels per day of capacity, products capacity that's starting to get impacted. If that continues or if that grows even further, then you might see even bigger impacts. But again, who knows where the politics goes? Who knows whether there is a change in the context that we currently see in 2 years' time? So again, what we can focus on is we focus on the diversification of trade routes. We use our world-leading trading organization to be able to make sure that we have capacity and we have the arteries, the pipelines, the ships that allow us to get energy from where it's being produced and sourced to wherever we need to deliver it for our customers, recognizing that might change.
Right. So let's follow on that and turn to LNG. Wael has just come from a big celebration. I won't call it a party. It was really a celebration of a pretty big industrial achievement. And tell them where you were and why you were there and what was accomplished.
Yes, I was in Vancouver. You wouldn't think that that's where energy would be, but it is. So British Columbia is now home to a 16 million ton per annum facility known as LNG Canada.
Which is a big facility.
It's a big facility. It is the single largest foreign investment in Canada's history. And it brings Canada...
And how long did it take?
We took a final investment decision in 2016 or so it's close to a decade when all is said and done. But this now delivers molecules that are coming out of the fields in Alberta, or for that matter in British Columbia, all the way to customers in Japan and beyond. Right? So it, in essence, connects those molecules with the world. And what's fascinating about that particular project, of course, is it is advantaged for a couple of reasons. One is the proximity of the West Coast location to Asia, which is where the biggest LNG demand growth is. Around 3/4 of the world's LNG demand growth in the next 20 years or so is going to come from Asia.
For those who, just to say, LNG, for those who don't know, is liquefied natural gas.
Thank you.
For the video.
And I forget sometimes, we get so immersed in it as an industry. So it is a major undertaking, and the government and the partners and the First Nations and the communities had the opportunity this week to celebrate what was the first cargo, which we sailed out in June of this year. Today we're up to the 14th cargo already.
So
and
tell them how difficult it was, what you had to do to make that happen.
I mean, this is the location. It's a site in an area called Kitimat, which is in British Columbia. It is a part of the Haisla Nation, one of the First Nations there. So working with the First Nations, with the federal government, with the provincial government, to be able to take a pristine part of the world and protect the ecology, the environment, while building one of the most ambitious LNG projects, I think, of recent times. It is heartwarming to see today, when you go there, how the footprint has retained the beauty of the location, while at the same time, in essence, putting a flag for Canada in the LNG export space. One which, of course, the timing of it has been also tremendous from a Canadian perspective, and one which we are very proud.
You want to say why the timing is?
Well, I think for obvious reasons, with the challenges, with, you know, the realities of old, the realities of old are no longer ones that I think Canada can depend on.
Yeah.
And therefore, what you can see, and Mark Carney said it, the Prime Minister talked about wanting to become a global energy superpower. And so I think that is the destination. And a project like this starts to move Canada in that direction after what had been multiple fits and starts before this.
So how do you see, I mean, LNG is a big focus for Shell. I think the outlook is that the global market will increase by 50% in the next couple of decades. Just how does Shell see its role in it and see the role of LNG? Because it's a big part of the future for the company.
Yeah, let me say a couple words then on LNG, and then a few words on where we are in LNG. LNG is an industry that's around 60 years old. It's evolved over time. Today, just to give you dimensions, around 400 million tons of LNG moves in any year. It's really been underpinned by demand in China, and in essence, it is taking gas from where it's plentiful to locations that are starved of gas, and you take it through a ship. You supercool it, and then you warm it up on the other end. Long story short. LNG is expected indeed to grow by, we think, around 60% between now and 2040. LNG makes up around 13% of the gas that's sold in the world. That should go up to around 20% by that time, by 2040. We think LNG is actually one of the most expedient ways to be able to bring down global emissions, because a big source of those global emissions is coal. And the ability to be able to backfill the demand that coal today occupies in places like India, China, and Asia in general with LNG is what can be a massive differentiator. Actually, one of the biggest reasons that US emissions came down over the years was the shift from coal to gas.
Maybe the biggest.
The biggest, yeah. And then similarly, you see the same in Asia today.
Right.
Shell has been in this industry from day one. We owned the first ship that took LNG across borders at that point in time. Today, we are the largest international oil company, international energy company playing in this space. So to give you a sense, we trade around 70 million tons of those 400 million tons. We're growing by around 4 to 5% every year between now and 2030, and we have a number of projects. You've mentioned LNG Canada. We have Qatari projects coming up, Abu Dhabi, major development, Nigeria, and so on. Our conviction is that LNG and our sale of LNG will be the biggest contribution we will make to the energy sector over the next decade. both in terms of value, but also in terms of lowering emissions. And so we are absolutely committed to this sector.
That's a very big statement, I mean, in terms of its role in your overall strategy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we feel not only are we differentiated in it, if you just read the number every single day, if you pick up one of the FT articles or one of the Wall Street Journal articles, somebody's trying to get into LNG.
Right.
That tells you we're doing well by being there and being the largest there. We also recognize that, like every industry, this is going to be cyclical. So you're going to have times of oversupply, times where it's going to be tight, like what we saw in 2022. A company like ours can play through those cycles. We have the largest number of liquefaction plants, so the supply, and we have the largest number of customers, and therefore we look to optimize and support our customers through the volatility that they see in the markets.
So what about the United States? I mean, what percentage of Shell's business is in the US? And is there the focus in the US?
It's the largest country for Shell. So we have close to 11,000 staff here. The largest amount of capital employed we have as a group is in the US. We spend somewhere around $10 billion here every single year between capital expenditure and operating, roughly half and half. Our drive actually is very much aligned with where the US administration is advocating. So I'll give you a couple of proof points around that. Gulf of America. Shell operates today around 700,000 barrels per day. We evacuate through our sister pipeline companies, around 70% of the crude that sits in the Gulf. So we play a very, very important role in the Gulf of America. We are the largest off-taker or buyer of US LNG. Today we buy around 16 million tons a year. Just to put it into perspective, we buy as Shell more than Spain, Italy, Germany, and France put together.
Scale.
So that's what we buy from the US. We pay anywhere between $3+ billion for that every single year. And of course, both the Gulf of America and US LNG are very high on the agenda of the government, and therefore we see ourselves as very much aligned with that agenda. But we also work beyond that. We are working on, for example, bio opportunities. We have power in the US. We're one of the largest traders of energy, both gas and power. And so the US is a tremendously important market for us. And that's why you see me here, Dan, more than you would typically like of a European CEO, but that's the reality. We are...
And you have some investors here.
We have more than half of our investors are US investors.
Right. So let me turn to another subject, energy transition. Peter Orszag and I, as you know, have written an article on it. Jason Center at Columbia does a lot of work on it. How have you seen thinking about energy transitioning?
Yeah, look, I think firstly to recognize energy transition didn't start over the last 6-7 years when we started to use the term. The world has been transitioning in its energy system for as far back as one can go. I think a few years ago there was, we believed that the pace of the energy transition, in particular towards lower carbon solutions, was accelerating. And we were right. The reality is new energy forms were required, both lower carbon, but also a lot of the conventional carbon, not to mention coal. So everything was going to be growing. Right? What you see today is that some of what we thought was going to happen, like the significant growth in power, is happening, but it's very concentrated. So you look at renewable energy, over half of the investments in recent years in renewable energy have been in China. So it's very localized. We had expected to see more of it, for example, in Europe. Europe has moved quite far, but we thought it would be even further. And similarly in the US, by the way. We also saw that many of our customers were demanding lower carbon molecules. We have been disappointed with that, because what we saw was while they demanded it, both the governments that had promised to create the mandates that would encourage that demand, and the boardrooms that were meant to be encouraging the purchase of those higher cost, lower carbon molecules, that didn't materialize.
Are you saying hydrogen?
I'm saying everything from bio to hydrogen to CCS as a service, it hasn't materialized as fast as we would have hoped.
And you did a rebalancing in Shell. I mean, obviously you got some criticism in the press, but you rebalanced. Can you explain what the thinking was about the rebalancing?
So we have been and we continue to be absolutely committed to being able to supply the energy that our customers need. But we can go at the pace that our customers are able to move, and we need to be able to be conscious of that. We as a company have put around $20 billion of our capital into lower carbon solutions. I don't want to shrink that. I feel that that's a good balance for a company that has over $200 billion of capital employed to test and to learn and to create at least a 10% return on that investment.
And that was the key thing, looking to say, is there a return on that?
Is there a return, right? Today, we do not get the 10% return. That's unacceptable. So what we have committed to our investors and to ourselves is we will work over the next 4 or 5 years to get to a north of 10% return on that investment. Otherwise, we will not have earned the right to be able to invest the capital of our shareholders in those spaces. Now, there's parts of it where we are encouraged. For example, bio spend, so bio-based products, whether that's biogas, bio-LNG, helped by certain mandates in Europe, means that big shipping companies like Hapag-Lloyd and MSC and CMA CGM, these companies are coming to us and saying, we want 5% blends. We want LNG, 95%, and 5% blend of bio-LNG. That's all it takes. 5% feels small, but these are massive quantities when you talk about how much bioproduct there is, and it already brings down their carbon footprint. The only way that can work is if the mandates are in place and enforceable.
Right.
And so what we are doing is, now that we have our capital invested in the areas we like, we are looking to continue to churn through that capital, not add to it, but churn through it until we get to a level where we can get above that 10% and prove to ourselves which of these are the winning businesses where not only is there value in it, but that we can outcompete others. Because it's not just about, I see value, we have to be
Was it
differentiated.
a challenge to explain this to the market, to the world, the kind of rigor or discipline you were bringing to it?
It's gotten easier. It's gotten easier with time, because I think important to rewind back to 2019, sitting in Northwest Europe, it was a different context, right? Post 2022, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that sort of started to move into a direction where we could bring a much more balanced debate. I've tried from day one, Dan, coming into the job, to say we're not swinging the pendulum. We are going after a balanced strategy.
Right.
But a balanced strategy requires us to steward shareholder capital in a prudent and respectful way. And that does mean we owe it to our shareholders to deliver the returns that they expect of us. Some people, and I think what I've learned is, you will always have 10% who will support you. You'll always have 10% who will oppose you no matter what you do. If we can work with a persuadable 80% in the middle on the back of data and facts, I think we can prevail.
Right. So let's talk about something that's not even more recent than 2022, which is really the waking up to AI and the energy aspects of AI. You have a surge, I think it's called the surge scenario. And you talked about scenarios at the beginning which provide a kind of framework for thinking about the future. And I think maybe explain what the surge was about and just how you see AI affecting the energy sector and how it's affecting Shell.
Yeah, the surge scenario in essence sees or optimizes for economic growth. The scenario starts with the premise that the world will look to maximize economic realities. By the way, that sounds obvious. Clearly, that's not, right? I mean, during the COVID days, we talked about, is the world going to optimize for health, wealth, or security, right? wealth being economic, of course, security given people were more and more worried about what's happening across borders, or health, the pandemic. So this is almost doubling down on economic growth. And a big part of that is AI and what the AI boom can bring. The perspective of Surge is that, in essence, for AI to grow to its potential, you will need a ton of energy, transformative amounts of energy to be able to achieve what's being talked about. That, of course, is going to mean even higher demand on energy. But the balance of it in AI, with that Surge scenario is, at some point, that the AI itself will help us continue to optimize the utilization of energy in AI and in other utilizations of energy around the world. And so what you see is a peak, in particular, of gas, because it is the most expedient way to be able to provide that energy for AI. And at some point, it levels off a bit, because what happens is we become much more efficient, as you would hope we become, in the way that we use that energy to be able to get the outcomes we want. We as Shell see AI, of course, from two sides. One is what we can do for AI. And so the energy we can provide to all the hyperscalers. It's one of the things maybe that surprised me most coming into this job. I thought I'd spend most of my time with oil and gas governments and many of the customers that we serve.
And national oil companies.
It really is a lot of time with the hyperscalers and what's happening, because the demand is intense at the moment. So we're looking at how we can satisfy that demand. The other side of...
Can you expand, what do you just expand on that for a second?
So for example, here in the US, we have a company called Savion, which is a major power producer, over 16 gigawatts of energy that we have to be able to supply. So anything that is permitted today is a premium, because you can get, if it's permitted, you could potentially get access to that data center in a very, very quick time. And therefore you see many of the players wanting to actually locate the data centers next to the areas where we have accessible power. We, of course, also have this large gas and power business that I talked about. So our traders are constantly taking positions to be able to satisfy our customers' demand. Just 2 weeks ago, when President Trump visited us in the UK, Google announced a significant investment in a data center in the UK, and announced that Shell will be its renewable energy provider for that investment. So we will offer them offshore wind capacity. We don't own it, but we trade it. We will offer them a significant portion of the battery storage that we have, and we will keep them whole to be able to provide the energy that Google has signed up for. Right? So we are using those levers. The other side of AI is our use of AI.
Yeah, exactly. Is it happening?
It is happening. It's happening all across the organization. It's been happening for some time. I mean, in 2014, somebody much smarter than me in Shell decided to go in and bring data scientists in, and we built up over 260 teams of data scientists in the company, many of whom have helped us, well before the hype of AI, to already start to get our data in order, to get the systems harmonized, and so on and so forth. One of the biggest learnings I've had around AI is, while my desire has been, let's throw AI at things, to be honest, I've learned that the biggest value of AI is going to be in rethinking the way we fundamentally do work as a company.
Can you expand on that?
So today, the workflows that we have are designed for people. And those workflows are built over decades, sometimes on very basic analog processes. You can throw AI at it, but the reality is we need to have rethought many of these workflows altogether, all the way from the way we explore. So just put an example on the table. When you explore, you have multiple disciplines: geology, geophysics, reservoir engineering coming together. So our workflows are designed that the geologist does the work and then gives it to the geophysicist, and so on and so forth. Today with AI, what you can do is you can, in essence, use all the data. Sometimes we have been in a reservoir, in a field for 100 years. We have multiple data points, from drilling the wells to the production data. we think we understand the physics and the chemistry of the subsurface, but the reality is we understand it up to an extent. If you throw AI at it, maybe there's ways we can reimagine and go after pattern recognition rather than just the science of it.
Right.
How you include all of that in a prospect to drill an exploration well in 6 months' time is fascinating. We drilled a few now. We drilled one in Nigeria where our geologist said there's no hydrocarbon there. AI said there was.
Who won?
It came somewhere in the middle. There was hydrocarbon, but it wasn't commercial. and so, but
Thank goodness for that geology.
Exactly. But that opens up your eyes to what is possible. And the problem right now is we are limited by our own imagination of what's possible, both in terms of what the technology can do, but also our imagination of how we can fundamentally reset what we're trying to do.
So it's still the beginning.
It is very much the beginning. But I can tell you, if there's one topic that as an executive team I have, for the last year or so, we have been working on, is that fundamental reset as we embrace the possibilities of AI, while recognizing we're going to have to start to learn how to walk before we can run.
Right. Well, we have a few minutes for questions, and so I think there's a mic that will rove if somebody raises their hand. Right here at Cox.
Yes.
Oh, the mic. Gotta wait for the mic.
Thank you. Back in the days when the Gulf of America was called the Gulf of Mexico.
That was a long time ago.
Long time. But Shell was really on the cutting edge of developing from the old jackups to Deepwater to really deep water. Is that still one of the frontiers that Shell is working on in developing technology? And how important is it, deep water exploration and drilling to Shell?
I'd argue it's one of the most important elements of our portfolio and continues to be. So you're absolutely right. The evolution of that business, which I had the privilege of running, and my colleague Colette, who's here today, who runs our US business, also runs the Gulf of America's business. This is, when we used to talk about Deepwater, you used to talk about drilling from the pier. Today, there are wells we drill that are in 3,000, 9,000, I'm thinking kilometers now. So 9,000 feet of water, and then another 30,000 feet below the seabed. We have moved up the pressure gradient. Today, there's something known as the 20,000 PSI. Typically, we used to drill 10,000, then 15,000, now we're going to 20,000. And it's not just the wells, it's all the infrastructure as you get higher pressure, higher temperature fluids coming through into the offshore facility. We need to be able to have all the metallurgy to be able to deal with it. Shell continues to be a leader in that space. It's one of the areas I continue to be incredibly proud of how the team does. I mentioned earlier 700,000 barrels per day of capacity that we operate. That's roughly 1/3 of the entire Gulf of America. We are one of the largest leaseholders in the Gulf and are very thankful for the fact that the administration is bringing back the lease sales, which is a critical part of keeping that dynamism in the area. And I still see a long future for that business. And for, by the way, all the economies around the Gulf, many of whom continue to depend on that, both from a supply chain perspective and, you go to an offshore platform, it's father to son, grandfather to father to son who continue to operate in that space. So it's an area where we are very proud of the role that we have played in Louisiana, but also beyond that.
Right. I think there's a question over here. Or there's one here and then one right behind him, and then one behind them and one over there. And so let's make the question short. No, I think he was first. We'll just go in order here.
Thank you. I would like to know how do you assess the India exposure? You talked about the Chinese interest, but how much is exposure risk you have on Indian oil, especially if the sanctions are coming from the Trump administration?
We don't have oil production in India. Our big focus in India has been gas imports through our Hazira terminal. I think from an India perspective, who knows where the world goes? Clearly, India has been a big buyer of Russian products. And the jury's out as to whether the current geopolitical challenge is going to mean that India does continue or starts to moderate its consumption of Russian product. At the moment, we have seen a moderation in the position that the Indian government has taken. Difficult to call where that goes in future. In particular because one of the biggest advantages is Indian refineries benefit from Russian crude, and therefore there is a natural placement in India, but that could come with much bigger geopolitical repercussions.
Question, right?
Well, thank you. The Canadian government had a list of the most important projects for Canada, and number one was Phase 2 of LNG Canada. Have you gotten any closer, and have you gotten them to see your side of the story on reaching an FID for LNG Canada Phase 2?
There's three things that we consider when we reflect on an LNG Canada Phase 2 investment. One is overall government, both provincial and federal government support. I don't think I've ever seen the stars as well aligned as I see now in Canada. That event that I was at, that Dan referenced, from the provincial leadership to the federal government leadership, everyone is really keen on that project materializing. Big tick. The other two key elements, one is essentially the engineering, procurement, construction contract, so the package itself. Is it going to be competitive? Question mark. And then two, where is the LNG market when we come to the investment? Because there is a significant amount of capacity being built at the moment, including here in the US. Just the number of final investment decisions being taken surprises me, if I'm honest, because it's at the higher end of the cost curve, yet those capacities continue to come in. So it's not economically fully rational. And therefore we need to be able to then judge when is the right time to bring more capacity from a Shell perspective.
It's quite remarkable. The microphone is roving itself, so right there.
Hi, Lucas. I'm one of the fellows in the 2025 program. I have a question about, as you meet with these hyperscalers and presumably governments to discuss the big AI projects that are coming up, how big of a demand are you forecasting over the next decade? And beyond that, how do you model the risk that, whether this might possibly be a bubble versus this is like a very sustainable source of, supply of energy that's required?
Yeah, great question. Look, the reality that we see at the moment is there is an incredible enthusiasm with everyone we talk to. Sometimes unfounded, because the winners will be the ones that are most economically rational at the end of the day. You have low cost of energy. You're not going to import energy to put into a data center because you're always going to be disadvantaged. So what we do is we're very cautious. Whenever we're going to commit to a sales contract, the creditworthiness of the customer and their ability to be able to withstand what is going to be a 10 to 15 year agreement is absolutely key. And so for us, we're not trying to call, if you listen to some of the numbers, it's mind-boggling. Others maybe a bit too conservative. Doesn't matter where it is. What we try to focus on is make sure that every single agreement we sign up to, all the bells and the whistles required to be able to protect ourselves, in particular from a credit event.
Yes, a quick question. In old days when clean energy was a good thing, Shell was a forefront for carbon zero. And still, if you go review Shell, they keep talking about that's our ultimate. But now, in the whole meeting, you didn't talk about clean energy, and so my question is, how do you reconcile that accomplished net zero and so much investment in exploration and production? So it doesn't match. So
yeah, great question. Look, so firstly, we still believe that if the world wants to get to net zero, it's not going to happen overnight. We believe that it's not about just what the company does, it's about the system. We had a big legal case in the Netherlands, and the Court of Appeal in the Netherlands made the best argument, which I couldn't make as clearly. And the argument they made is, today if Shell is growing its LNG sales to China, and through those sales to China, what's happening is that Shell's own emissions are growing because they're increasing sales, But China's emissions are coming down significantly, what's known as our Scope 3. Actually, the world's emissions are coming down significantly. That's the contribution we can make. Today. Tomorrow, we are creating investments in bio-LNG. That will take you the next level down in terms of emissions. And one day, we already have in our labs and in our research facilities pathways to get to synthetic LNG, which will be zero emissions. And that would use all the infrastructure we have today. It would use the pipelines, the ships, our LNG facilities, except it would not be fossil-based energy. It would be decarbonized, defossilized. So there are pathways. We are not playing as much in renewable power. You're absolutely right. And that is because we invested in renewable power, and what we've learned is we do not have a competitive advantage to invest in renewable power generation. Other utility companies are much better placed at doing it. Our advantage is more in the trading of power. And so what we have done is, while we continue to look at the North Star of getting to net zero, we are just planting the seeds in the areas where we think we can make the biggest contributions, and we see pathways to get there, but it has to be economical and it has to be sequenced in the right way.
Now, let me make 2 comments to add to that. One of the questions is, why should a company like Shell have global targets put on it when it's operating, let's say, in India or China, a country that doesn't have a net zero by 2050 goal? And I think that thing has really not been thought through. The other thing, to be a little self-serving, the article Peter Orszag and I wrote makes the argument why net zero ambitions are there, but 2050 gets actually farther and farther away. If you're talking about, is the world going to commit 5% of GDP every year to achieve those goals? And I think that there's been an experience since COVID, because a lot of the thinking about net zero was during COVID when demand was down and prices down. We've had some experience since then.
When it was fashionable,
What?
When it was fashionable, they were upfront and dancing.
Right.
We are the leader.
Right. Let's see, was there another question?
Last question.
Last question? On this side, finally this side of the room gets a question.
Thanks for this great conversation. You mentioned the IEA decline rate report showing how much investment is still needed. There was also a report last week, the Dallas Federal Reserve quarterly, showing nearly 80% of executives are holding back on investment because of uncertainty about the oil price outlook, the cost of production, the regulatory environment. So I'm just wondering how you think about investing. You just both said a need for a lot of investment given all of that uncertainty. And when we roll the clock forward, while there's concern about low oil prices now, do you see a scenario where we're setting ourselves up
That's
for
a really big set of
super
questions.
cycle? No, just that are we underinvesting given the time frame that it takes for the next Guyana or wherever it's coming from, when you roll the clock forward for whatever you think oil demand is, do we have a problem in a couple of years from a supply demand balance and an oil price environment?
Thanks, Jason. I think if you go back anyway 20, 30 years, our success in exploring and discovering barrels to be able to compensate for the barrels that we are producing was much higher, right? We were at the time recovering 2 to 3 times what we were producing. Today we're at a fraction of what we are producing every year. So I think sometimes it's more almost the argument is made around underinvestment like it's a question of capital deployment. The reality is the big discoveries are just fewer and fewer, right? We're in Namibia. We'd love to invest in Namibia, but it has to be returns that are commensurate with the investment you would make. And when you have challenges technically, it's tougher. So most easy oil, it has been discovered. And so what we see right now is the opportunity to be able to continue to do better with the recovery from our existing fields. I mean, remember, these fields, if we're lucky, we get to 30% recovery from the fields. You add another 1 to 2% recovery, that's material in the context of what we're trying to do. I think to your point around how we're thinking, how the world's thinking about it, there's some big questions, right? I mean, OPEC is bringing back barrels into the market. There's questions around the impact of tariffs and inflationary pressures over the coming years. The break-even points of the swing producer, which is shales in the US, is going up and up. So all that context means there's a bit more concern around it. You're right that at some point the way that concern manifests itself is maybe in the shorter term you'll have a a drop in oil price as OPEC brings the barrels. Maybe longer term, you have a significant spike. And that's been the boom and bust of our sector, of course. I don't know how to reverse it. The biggest thing I focus on is how do you navigate a company like ours through it to be able to have the muscle in the low points of the cycle to make the counter-cyclical moves that allow you to be strong in the high points in the cycle. And that's what we continue to navigate.
Great. So please, everyone, join me in thanking Wael for a great discussion tonight. Thank you.